morning, Peter.
Good morning, Bill.
So it's so good to see you. You're in your studio in Venice, and I see a lot of new paintings behind you, which is great. How have you been getting through this crazy time?
Well, it's because I don't drive anymore. It's not that different for me. I'm my son takes me shopping once a week, and then I have friends that come by, but it's pretty much what I normally do anyway. Just stay in the studio and stay at home, and whatnot. So everything is it's not affecting me the way it is affecting most people.
Yeah, well, actually, most of the artists have been saying, this is just, it's a great time to be in the studio, like it's a normal thing anyway, but with fewer distractions. So
right, yeah.
Well, great, and clearly, I'm seeing some really great new work. I was reflecting on this. I was trying to remember when we did our first show together. Was it 94, 95? 96?
Probably, yeah.
Around there.
I think 15 years ago.
25 years ago.
25. Really?
Yeah, it was.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was in the space on Market Street.
On Market Street, right? Yeah.
And I think the first show we did together was you and Charles Hill.
Yes.
So with the two of you, and that did really well, and that was in the old LA Louver space on Market Street in Venice.
Right.
And then the next show we did together, you said, I've got this friend, Koji Takei, who's an artist, and I think you'd like his work and it'd be complementary with mine. And that's how we met. That's how I met Koji, and we did a really amazing show with the two of you that also looked really great.
Yeah, those were the old days.
Yeah.
The old space and whole different time.
It does feel like a whole different time.
Yeah.
Speaking of time and the old days, let's just talk a little bit about, where you grew up, how you decided to become an artist. Was it clear from the beginning that this was the path for you, or you grew up in the Valley? Is that correct?
I grew up in the Valley. I went to a junior college, Valley Junior College, which was actually a very good school. And I had a teacher named Fidel Daniele who also wrote for Art Forum at the time. Mm-hmm. And he sort of mentored me onto changing my major from psychology to art. My father was very upset when that happened. And he said something to the effect, he was a film editor, and he said, well, the art business is the only business that I know that's weirder than the film business. So so I didn't pay much attention to him anyway. And I went on to, get my degrees, and I taught art also at UC Irvine and Otis and where else? Art Center. So that was sort of the beginning of things. First, I did construction work, and then it was such a blessing to get teaching jobs rather than working 8 hours a day in construction. So it's been a wild ride. Yeah.
When you first started, some of that early work was more installation like you were doing. Let's talk about that a little bit. What that period was about.
Well, the early work was done with powerful lights and mirrors, and so I could affect a space in a room, like a corner or sometimes the whole room, by shining a light on a mirror, which cast a shadow and also made a reflection. And that was sort of the beginning of the kind of imagery that I'm doing now. Actually, I mean, it's been a very there's been a lot of ground covered in time, but kind of the the light and shadow and images of light are there's a lot of similarities in the paintings that I'm doing with that.
Were there in those early installation pieces you were doing? Were there any artists that sort of inspired that direction for you?
Well, I think that Bob Irwin's work was in the air, those discs, and that they were dependent on a certain type of lighting, and I guess Jim Terrell's work, the light and space artists from LA, and also Dan Flavin was a big inspiration in that context. But then I figured that I could do very similar things, painting directly on the wall. So there was a period of time where the paintings were, on the wall in a funny kind of way. They were environmental.
Mm-hmm.
In a funny way, they were like frescoes. And then they developed to be the images on canvas.
Yeah, Michael Zakian, when he did that wonderful retrospective for you at the Wiseman Museum in Malibu, I recall had one of those wall painting pieces.
That's right. Yeah.
Installed, which was really interesting. It's funny. There's a painting behind you with a triangular shape against the yellow background, and I remember one of the early paintings of yours where I really started to see what you were doing with this sense of space. That triangle shape, or that diamond shape rather, had a little spout that kind of came out of it. And I said,
right.
And I was calling it this diamond shape, but you titled it White Room.
Right.
Said, why do you call it a room? And you said, because it's looking from above, and that little spout is the doorway into the room.
Exactly.
And the painting completely flipped for me. And then I started to see your Buscar pieces, which for people who don't know, that those are the ones like that one that has the white in the middle and red on either side, or the one with the white in the
right.
middle, the blue on either side. Those all of a sudden started to become very much like portals. And if you focused on the center and the white part, it was like it came forward and became a monolith. But if you took your focus off of that and you focused on the sides of the painting, they came forward, and the white all of a sudden became space, and it was a space that you'd walk through, kind of
right.
walk through the portal.
Well, the door was the image, and that I don't know, sparked a lot of paintings, and then eventually the door went away. But for a long time, there was those images. They looked like vessels because the door was like a spout on a vessel. And that was a big group of work. I did those for quite some time. Yeah,
it's just, it's interesting because once that flip occurred to me, where I saw what I thought was sort of an objective shape, and all of a sudden it became a space, I realized that that's a lot of what you're going after with all of these paintings, where you'll have, as your focus changes, space becomes object becomes space, and you get this real kind of sense of movement of your perspective, much like I think a lot of the light and space artists were doing, trying to catalyze your sense of perceiving the space around you.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said yes, because if you said no, Bill, that's not at all what this is about, I would have been saying the wrong thing for 25 years. So,
well, I think you're right on the money, Bill. I'm going to play it safe.
So when you first got started, you were doing these sort of conceptual pieces with mirrors, and then painting the murals on the walls. There was nothing to sell, really. So were you getting galleries interested in your work? How were they marketing your work, or how, how did you start to get going with showing
Well,
galleries?
at the time, I wasn't, let's see, I think my first show, which was an installation, was with Claire Copley.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a bent towards conceptual art. And somehow I fit into, kind of a non-material identity that shared with, other artists that she showed. And then from there, I started showing with Rosamund Felsen, who was, I think she showed other people who did installations like Richard Jackson, and I'm trying to remember who else. But anyway, so I fit into that, into her gallery or whatever. She had really good artists, but she didn't sell very much work. She was more about idealism than materialism.
Yeah.
To kind of let her off the hook. But that was a good run. That I enjoyed showing there, and in this space also was a good space. But then that was the when the galleries were on La Cienega, and everything really changed quite a bit from La Cienega had been this art center, and it hasn't been that way for about 30 years, so.
When you were showing with Rosamund, was that in the 70s?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just when there wasn't much of an art scene really to speak of in LA until probably the mid-late 70s.
Well, there were the Venice guys, Billy Albingston, Robert Irwin, Larry Bell was the youngest. Trying to think of who else.
Joe Good.
Oh, Joe Good, yeah. People like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they were. It was like the fetish finish was the identity. Peter Alexander was another one. Wayne Valentine was another one. Those guys were casting resin. So it was that was kind of the first cohesive group of artists in LA or in the West Coast. So I feel like myself and Chuck Arnoldi and Laddie Dill and maybe Peter Alexander, we were the next generation after Bob Irwin and Billy and those folks.
And did you get to know those guys fairly well
Yeah, I knew Billy pretty well. He actually he was my landlord. He backed Ned Evans and Bruce Richards, who got these 2 stories in the Andrews Hardware building, and they converted them into studios. And Billy was kind of the money behind that, and so he was my landlord, and I got to be friends with him in that context. But of course, I always knew who he was. He was a very famous, he was, like I say, he and Bob Irwin and Ed Keenholz is another, those guys were the first guys that I knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sorry I never met Ed Keenholz. He was showing with LA Louvre, which was my next door neighbor, and I saw him in passing, but I never sat down and got a chance to get to know him, which I think I really would have loved. He's had like quite a character.
Quite a character.
In fact, Henry Hopkins, who you got to know and became kind of a mentor to me. He was he had a gallery briefly in the early 60s, and then he became a museum curator, and was a big supporter of Ed Ruscha and Joe Good and these guys. In fact, Henry told me a story when he had this gallery on La Cienega. Joe Good walked into his gallery with a bunch of drawings under his arm, and Henry took a look at him and liked him, and said, "Yeah, I'll show your work. Do you have any friends that are as good as you are that you think would fit in?" And he said, "Well, I've got this, friend Ed Ruscha and Larry Bell. You might be interested in seeing their work." And
Yeah.
what a great way to start out. But yeah, Henry told me this story when he first met Kienholz. He went over to Kienholz's house. I think it was in the Hollywood Hills. And the garage was the first thing you kind of passed on your way up the hill. And Kienholz turned to Henry and he said, "Hey, Henry, do you shoot?" And Henry thought, he's like, "What? Heroin, drugs? What's he talking about?" He steps into the garage and Kienholz had a target set up and handed Henry a gun. And he said, "Go ahead, try it." And so Henry shot and hit the bullseye. And Kienholz looked at him and he said, "Henry, I think we're going to get to be good friends."
That's great.
So, when you, after with Rosamond, you lived in Pasadena for a while. Was that, you had a studio there?
Right. When I was in college in graduate school, I looked for studios in Venice, couldn't find any, and Pasadena had been let's see, it hadn't been redeveloped yet, so there was a lot of lofts in Pasadena, of which Bruce Nauman and Richard Jackson, they had studios in Pasadena, and they became my friends, and a guy named Tom Seidel, and a couple of other people. So there was a small community in Pasadena of LA artists. It was mainly Venice, but then Pasadena was the kind of secondary place, I guess you'd say.
Was that sort of during the time when Walter Hopps was director of the Pasadena Museum?
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was instrumental, and he owned a house that he rented to Bruce Nauman and Richard Jackson, and I got to know them. They became my peers.
Phenomenal. And I know you and Bruce still stay in close touch.
Yes, yeah, he's a great guy.
When was it that you first started to feel like you were getting some recognition for your work?
Well, I think early on with when I was showing with Rosamond, because she wasn't doing so much business, but she was well connected. Her Sid Felsen had been one of the owners of Gemini Gel, and Rauschenberg and Johns, and a lot of I think Bruce did prints there. So that was sort of she was great as far as getting to know the community in the LA art world, which is totally different then than it is now.
Yeah,
different beast. So, but that was my beginning.
Yeah, well, certainly that time with Gemini and having all those New York artists come out and do prints there really seemed to create a lot of interesting connections between the LA art scene and the New York art scene.
Right. Well, Stanley Grinstein, he was one of the owners of Gemini, and he also helped artists, of which he helped me out quite a lot. I was able to charge materials to his company, and it was just great. They had big parties at their house on Rockingham, which were very lavish. Totally, those things don't exist anymore in LA. I think you had been to some of those parties.
Yeah, I not in the heyday, but yes, the Grinsteins to me were sort of like the godmother and godfather of the LA art scene. They really did.
Exactly.
In fact, there was I can't remember if you were there or not, but right near the end of both of their lives, there was a meeting at their house of all these artists that were going to look at a way of supporting inner city arts, a nonprofit. And it was really such a great opportunity to see all of these artists who also were there, I think, knowing that Stanley wasn't in good health and Elise wasn't in good health. And it was an opportunity for them to kind of make sure that they were able to tell them how much they had helped them during their careers and their lives and how much they loved them. And it was great to be part of that.
The other thing, there was the Weissman, Fred Weissman had, a huge collection, and his wife Marcia was very involved in the arts, and Marcia had brought a group of people. She had groups that she would take to artist studios, and she brought the group to my studio in Pasadena. It was funny because at the time, the first time she did this, I was making these paintings on the wall, and Marcia couldn't. It flipped her out because they weren't objects. They couldn't be, bought. Which
Yeah.
of course it could be, but it wasn't in her. So she was kind of rude, and she left. The class left, and I went, God, I don't think I want to do that anymore. So anyway, the next year I get a call from her assistant saying that she wanted to bring the group by. And so she brought the group. She had a whistle. She'd blow the whistle. And started off, this is Peter Lodato. And she gave the most flattering presentation. And I just couldn't believe it, that this. And then there was talk of making a Weissman museum, and she put together a board of people, which she asked me to be on, and then somehow that stopped from being the Weissman Museum and became MoCA. So I was on the artist advisory board for MoCA. That was also a really good experience in the community.
That was quite a heady time and I know there was a lot of optimism because artists were brought into kind of the foundational concept of what MoCA could become.
Right.
How did you feel it met with that initial legacy, the initial optimism from the artists? Has it lived up to that?
I think it was a pretty exciting period of time. The two people that had the biggest influence were Sam Francis and Bob Irwin. And Sam Francis brought in Pontus Hulton, and also was Arato Isazaki, the architect. I think Sam was connected with him. And then Bob Irwin had brought in Richard Koshalik, who then became one of the first directors. And it was an exciting period of time. And both Bob and Sam were very powerful, and they deserve a lot of credit, both of them.
Yeah, no, it's just such a great museum, and I'd love to see more of the LA artists currently working today in, I wish they had a more active acquisition program.
I do too. I'm not in their collection.
And we'll look at rectifying that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know they've shown your work a number of times, but that's one of my frustrations is that, it's such an important contemporary museum, and I'd love to see it represent some of the major artists in LA better than it does.
I totally agree.
How did it come about that your work got into the Whitney Biennial? That was quite a major aspect of accomplishment for your career?
Um, I'm trying to remember. I There was PS1, which was the uh, it's called there's something for art and urban resources. It was PS1 and the clock tower. Those were spaces. PS1 was a elementary school in Queens, and I made a proposal to do an installation there, and the installation went really well. I got attention for that, and as a consequence, I was asked to be in a 1981 Whitney biannual. And at the same time, there was a guy named Steve Reichard who was represented artist. He wasn't a dealer, but he would get shows, and you would give him work and pay for his thing. And he had a consortium of people that would buy the work for him. And that's how he made the money. And as a result, I showed at the Aspen Museum of Art. Got a lot of play from Liebe Reichard. I had a 3-year contract, and after 3 years, we ran out of their connections, and that was sort of the end of my New York. I used to go there like 3 times a year, and I haven't been back very much since.
Well, Peter, this has been fantastic. I can't wait to get down to the studio and see the new work you've got. It looks really exciting. I love working with you. It's been, it's kind of amazing to me. It's been 25 years, but we've done some incredible shows together, and I'm so proud to call you my friend and an artist that I just love working with. So thank you.
Back at you, Bill.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, Peter.
Okay. Adios.
Adios. Take care.
You bet.